Hey all, we are here at KubeCon in Los Angeles. Los Angeles, the last day of KubeCon. And next up will be Spain, I believe, Valencia, Spain, and then on to Detroit. But for now, we are talking about reaching the incubator stage for open source projects with the CNCF. And we have some individuals who represent two projects. One is Crossplay.
That's me.
And the other is Open Telemetry.
Yep. That's us.
So why don't you go around and just introduce yourselves if you could?
Sure.
Go for it.
My name is Dan Mangum. I'm a maintainer of the Crossplane project. I work at a company called Upbound, which the creators of Crossplane started, and I do some upstream Kubernetes work as well.
Awesome. Nice. Hi, I'm Constance. I am a principal software engineer at Splunk, and I'm on the Open Telemetry Governance Committee along with Ted, and I'm also co-chair of this event.
Ah.
Yeah. And I'm Ted. I work at Lightstep, but I'm one of the Open Telemetry co-founders, so I spend most of my time on that project.
So I have to ask you, do you get any sleep as a maintainer?
It depends. I feel like it goes in cycles. Maybe if we're trying to get to incubation stage, no. But at other times, it ebbs and flows a little bit, I think, with project health.
Now, why would you not get any sleep coming up to incubation stage?
Well, I think it depends on how the project goes. We were talking about this a little bit before. Crossplane's process was actually fairly smooth. We definitely had a lot of folks chipping in on that, especially one of the creators of the project, Jared Watts. He did a lot of the effort around getting feedback from end users and talking to various other companies that were involved with maintaining the project. And so we had a really positive experience. It was great to get good feedback. And the folks at the CNCF also helped us a lot through the process as well.
So tell us about Crossplane.
Yeah, absolutely. So Crossplane, well, the main reason that folks usually come to Crossplane is they want to be able to provision infrastructure using the same APIs they use to provision workloads on Kubernetes. So while you may be familiar with creating a deployment or a pod or something like that, right? We allow you to create something like an RDS instance, and then we manage that externally for you on AWS or a Cloud SQL instance on GCP, et cetera. We also give you a layer to create abstractions on top of that. So you can build a platform. So you can say, present to your developers an API for a database, and that can be satisfied by an RDS instance or a Cloud SQL instance. And that doesn't have to actually be exposed to them. They need a consistent way to see that. So we usually use a phrase like build your own Heroku or something like that. And that's built on top of Kubernetes.
Okay. And Constance, maybe you could tell us about Open Telemetry.
Actually, I feel like Ted should get the credit for
Ted?
this. No, because of your history through the projects, like you definitely.
Sure.
You get the stage, Ted.
All right. Yeah. So Open Telemetry is the merger of two prior projects, Open Tracing, which is a CNCF incubated project.
Right.
We can talk a bit about that in our incubation discussion.
Yeah.
And Open Sense. They both in distributed systems. So we decided to merge the projects to ensure that there would be one single standard that we could get the whole community behind. And the merged project became Open Telemetry.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, Constance, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, that merging and how that then influenced your path to incubation. And I would love to hear as well, how do you even get to the path to incubation?
Long time. So I think one of our hesitations about wanting to apply for incubation is that we offer traces, metrics, and logs. But our first thing that we committed to for open telemetry was getting traces done. And so we were trying to balance how quickly we can make progress on tracing everything else, and also make sure that, because the open tracing community had been, I guess you can almost say in pause, I think that's a fair word to use, for so long. We want to make sure that they can start adopting newer variations of tracing specifically. So we were trying to get that done. But I think we're pretty lucky. Like the project took about 2 years to get to incubation from its creation, and that's a lot of work. I think there's over like 600 contributors, over roughly, almost 100 different companies representing that. So there's been a lot of hard work getting there.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a question we had of when do we want to incubate, because it's a very broad project where we're talking about all the different kinds of telemetry metrics, also eBPF from like
Events.
it keeps on going. So at what point do we cut it off? But because open tracing was in Incubate, but the community had kind of moved over to open telemetry already, and the tracing portion of open telemetry was stable. It was ready to replace open tracing entirely. I should also mention open telemetry is completely backwards compatible with open tracing. So there was this kind of weird gap where the more advanced project was open telemetry, but if you looked at the CNCF's project list, it looked like open tracing was the more advanced project. Yeah. So we applied for incubation so that by getting open telemetry to incubation, we could then archive the open tracing project. And that would kind of clear the landscape up within the CNCF and make it match kind of reality a bit better.
That's a lot of moving parts, so to speak.
Yes. Open telemetry is a big project, which is
it's hard to keep track of. I'm always impressed when people are like, okay, all these things here, and you get an update. But also, like, that's actually when talking about our incubation process, we had to put a lot of effort into our docs, because a lot of people would say, like Ted or Alita would know where things are, but we didn't have it properly documented of like, hey, what is the actual pulse? Is this in beta, GA? And so for us, it was doing a lot of tidying up and making sure that we can clearly communicate where we are, what are our plans for the future, and so people can know what to expect going forward.
How did that compare to your experiences at Crossplay?
Yeah, so I was actually talking with them beforehand, and we had a bit of a similar experience, but in a different vein. Crossplane, the way it works is we have kind of a core engine. We call it Crossplane Core. And then we have different providers, which is probably familiar to folks who have used infrastructure as code tools like Terraform or something like that. And those will target the different cloud providers or other external APIs. And those have varying levels of maturity. So, thinking about that from a maintainer perspective, we wanted to make sure that we gave a strong signal of maturity and backwards compatibility of APIs. So we really focused in on that Crossplane core component and getting that to maturity and making sure we were stable. And then the providers, we had a unique experience, which is not common to a lot of CNCF projects, but we actually developed a conformance program along with our incubation process. So that was another kind of separate effort that we went through. It's very similar to Kubernetes conformance program. So we developed that, which allows providers to grow and mature, and actually folks outside the Crossplane ecosystem to develop their own Crossplane providers and make sure they're conformant with our standards that are defined as part of the core.
Yeah, that's super cool.
And then what do you see as the parallels and consistencies when what you went through? Or even, let's go, I mean, I think I get the parallels and consistencies. What were the major differences, do you think, when you hear their story compared to yours?
So I don't know all of the details of their story, but I think one of the things was we didn't have that challenge of an existing project being there. We were definitely kind of new in the space, but we did have the same challenge, which I think maybe all CNCF projects face, of really defining a very clear and concise mission for the project. We had a similar thing where our project is very wide reaching, and really just boiling that down to a sentence and saying in the CNCF ecosystem, this is the hole that we're going to plug, right? And making sure that our project and our documentation and marketing and everything around that all pointed to that mission. And so it's very simple to explain, this is what this project's here for, and this is why it should be incubating.
Yeah, it comes down to clarity. So what is your mission statement now, and how is it different than it was before?
I feel like it's the pretty
same.
Yeah.
I think we had to just make sure it was clear to people. The project has a clear boundary, which is the generation and transmission of telemetry. So one thing the project will never get involved in is an analysis. Like, we're never going to make a back end like Prometheus or Jaeger. All these other projects have a place where you store the data and look at it and do something with it. Open telemetry is just a standard for the data going into all of these different systems. So we want to play well with the community of different open source and vendor projects that analyze data and do root cause analysis and like all that stuff for people. But open telemetry never wants to get involved in that game. We want to just be the standard data that all of these different projects consume.
I see.
Yeah.
So you're the data they consume, as opposed to you kind of bringing in the data then to analyze.
Yeah, we're not trying.
No analyzing, because we can bring it. We have the collector that also can forward the data and
Right.
manipulate it in ways, but
Yeah,
no analyzing.
No analyze.
Yeah.
but it still ends up being a big project because there's a lot of different telemetry sources, and then we have to make sure this works across all the different programming languages and environments that are out there. So as a result of that, the project has just a lot of membership, and it's a very wide project in that respect.
Okay. So tell me then, you've all reached incubation status. How did you get that approval? Like what was that process like?
So I guess like we all know, like preparing that doc. I guess interested to find out if like for your tag is different, but like for us, we worked with a tag observability where they did a due diligence and asking questions of like, does it technically make sense? Are things compatible? What are our vision? Like especially for the observability space, I guess you can say it's pretty like there's a lot of offerings there, and so making sure that like, hey, if we're gonna add another thing there, let's make sure that we can have a vision and a future for where we can also still collaborate, so we don't create any fragmentation there. And then once we've answered those questions, working with the TOC and enabling them to get the answers they need. That's for us.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a similar experience. A big part that was really interesting from my perspective was talking to those end users. It's definitely something, in your project Slack channels and things like that, you hear folks all the time saying, I love this project, or I hate this project, or I'm using it in production or something like that. And you can kind of get a feel for the sentiment around your project. But, to go into incubation status, you actually need some tangible evidence of that. So there was a lot of user interviews and getting folks to provide quotes and that sort of thing and talk about their usage of it, which from a maintainer perspective, that was super rewarding because, it feels like, oh, we built this thing and folks actually think it's useful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming by. It sounds like you made it through the incubation process. Looks like it was a little bit more complicated just because you had multiple projects kind of like merging together. But there's some definite similarities with Crossplay and the process when you went through. I guess it comes down to that mission, doesn't it? It really comes down to that core mission and how you can really then follow through that. And that's not easy to do. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
super exciting.